The most common version of Discovery 4 is with a diesel engine. Before restyling, the base engine was a 2.7-liter. A 3.0-liter engine was also sold with it. After restyling, there was no choice left, only the 3-liter version was retained in the lineup. These turbodiesel V6s are very close cousins. The 3-liter engine can be considered a modernized version of the 2.7-liter. These power units were developed by Ford and were produced at their plant in England. The PSA concern is also involved in their development, which installed them on its large Peugeot and Citroën. These V6 diesel engines are based on a cast iron cylinder block and have a timing belt drive. On the Discovery 4, the 2.7-liter engine always comes with a single Borg-Warner BV50 turbocharger. The 3-liter version is always twin-turbo, with Garrett GT 1444 and GTB 1749 VK turbines. The 2.7-liter diesel engine has a fuel system from Siemens and the 3-liter one from Bosch. But both options with piezo injectors and fuel injection pumps are driven by a separate tooth belt. The biggest and most expensive problem with these engines is crankshaft failure. This trouble can be considered the most unpleasant surprise of Discovery 4. Many theories and opinions have been expressed on this matter. We are of the opinion that, firstly, you need to fill in 6.3 liters of oil, and not 5.5 liters, which correspond to the highest level on the dipstick. The fact is that to adapt to all-wheel drive vehicles, engineers changed the oil pan, but did not take this into account when adding level marks on the dipstick. And, worst of all, they made a long oil intake pipe, 1,316,048, through which the oil does not immediately enter the pump after starting the engine. Those conditions arise for slow but methodical wear of the liners. Secondly, these V6 diesels are not well suited for A5/B5 classification oil. Protection of bearings and friction pairs will generally be better with C3 oils. By the way, all manufacturers, except Land Rover, recommend oils of the ASEA C3 category, 5 watts -30 or 5 watts -40. In addition, you need to clean radiators and change antifreeze every 2 to 4 years. And to make it really good, you shouldn't get carried away with drag racing. It is believed that the crankshaft is still too weak for maximum acceleration from a standstill with the accelerator pedal recessed to the floor. Some auto repair shops recommend replacing the oil pump, LRO 13487, with every timing belt replacement. This is about $240 for an original spare part. In general, with clean radiators and the right oil, these engines can run more than 500,000 kilometers without crankshaft failure. Their turbines last a long time, but to significantly extend the life of the right turbine, you need to install an upgraded tube, LRO 87351, for draining oil from its cartridge. Such a tube drains oil into a channel in the cylinder block, and not in the pan. The old hole in the pan must be plugged. EGR valves cause some trouble. Fuel injectors are expensive to replace. When operating in frosty climates in highway modes, you need to install a shield covering the intercooler. This is the factory's strong recommendation. The fact is that under certain conditions, moisture from the air condenses in the intercooler and can freeze there, which will prevent the engine from starting. And if such an engine warms up in a warm box, then after starting it will easily sip water from the intercooler and die from water hammer. When inspecting a Discovery 4 with a diesel engine, you need to remove the decorative cover from the engine and inspect the unit for traces of oil. Oil may be present in the camber of the cylinder block, leaking from under the valve covers and along the front crankshaft oil seal. The coolant level in the reservoir must correspond to the indicator on the instrument panel. Often the level sensor lies. In this case, you will have to change the expansion tank. An auxiliary heater located next to the tank is present on all diesel Discovery 4. This useful unit can be frightening with copious amounts of smoke. This is when its chamber burns out. But the heater is almost completely repairable. 3.0 V6 Supercharged 340 horsepower 306 PS. 5.0 V8 375 horsepower 508 PN. Discovery 4 with gasoline engines is almost never found. The version with a 3-liter compressor V6 is super rare. More likely to come across this boxy SUV with a 5-liter naturally aspirated V8. Believe it or not, the cost of maintaining a Discovery with a petrol V8 may be even less than that of the diesel version, especially if the diesel does break his knee. The 5-liter V8 is more predictable, has no turbos, and is less prone to oil leaks. But the fuel consumption of such a car is twice that of a diesel one. ZF6 HP 26/6 HP 28 6-speed, ZF8 HP 78 street. Discovery 4 is sometimes found with 6-speed manual transmission, but the vast majority of versions come with an automatic transmission. This is either a 6-speed ZF or an 8-speed. This one has a retractable selector puck. Both transmissions are reliable, although not without nuances. Filters for 6 and 8 stage. Automatic machines are built into the sump, LR007474, LR023294. They can be changed every time the oil is renewed. True, such pallets in the original cost up to $150. Once every 100,000 kilometers, the electrical wiring bushing, TZV500010, LR065237, also needs to be changed. The all-wheel drive transmission of the Discovery 4 is reliable and not very troublesome. All its differentials are symmetrical. The central one is equipped with a lock. A rear differential lock is also provided, but not in all trim levels. The differential locks are automatically activated depending on the selected program in the terrain response system, transfer case paired with 8-speed. The transmission can be single-stage, i.e. without downshift. These do not have low and high buttons on the center console. Usually with mileages of more than 200,000 kilometers, oil spots appeared on the transfer case. These are symptoms of leaky seals. Fogging on gearbox seals appears after 300,000 kilometers. Transfer cases for 6 and 8-speed transmissions are different. According to the regulations, the oil in the transfer case must be changed every 120,000 kilometers. This includes 1.5 liters of gear oil of the GL5 specification, with a viscosity of 75 watts minus 90. The same oil can be poured into the front and rear gearboxes, in quantities of 0.65 and 1.25 liters, respectively, and it needs to be changed once every 10 years. However, if the rear gearbox is equipped with a lock, then the oil volume is 1.75 liters, and you need to use special oil BOT 720 specifications or its equivalents for locking differentials. Its replacement interval is 60,000 kilometers. By the way, the motor for activating the rear differential lock often stops working when driving more than 400,000 kilometers. As a rule, this is indicated by errors that are visible only during diagnostics. But the emergency mode of the transmission may also turn on. The original rear differential lock actuator, LR032711, costs a couple of $1,000. The analog costs about $600. But there are also options for actuators with repaired motors. There are cases of wear of gearbox bearings, primarily the rear gearbox. The hum from under the bottom can be eliminated by replacing worn bearings. The Discovery 4 drive shaft has 2 CV joints at the front, followed by an outboard bearing. There is only one crosspiece, the rear gearbox. The crosspiece is maintenance-free. Naturally, with long runs, the outboard bearing, the crosspiece, and the CV joints get tired. Rumble, play in the splines biting, all this is complemented by jerks while driving or changing direction. Such cardons are well known to specialized services that replace all their wearable parts in a couple of hours. There are many options for suitable CV joints, spiders and hanger bearings. The Discovery 4 has an electromechanical handbrake. Its actuator, LR072318, is located between the underbody and the rear subframe. The actuator pulls the parking brake drum cables located in the rear wheel brakes. Let's say right away that specialized service stations for British SUVs restore the functionality of the handbrake module in literally an hour without removing it from the car. Problems with the actuator begin due to stretching of the cables, LR018469 and LR018470, their jamming or breakage. All this leads to emergency blocking of the actuator and even to the fact that the motor will not start, because the control unit located in the handbrake is connected to the immobilizer. Yes, you understood correctly. If the parking brake actuator malfunctions, the engine will not start. True, in the first couple of minutes you can press the handbrake button, there is a high chance that the actuator will unlock. By the way, the emergency release cable for the handbrake is located under the cup holders. But sometimes, no matter how much you pull it, the mechanism will not unlock. The air suspension of the Land Rover Discovery 4 is very reliable. The air springs last more than 200,000 kilometers and are repairable. The original rear air springs have anthers that protect the shock absorber strut from dirt and moisture, and therefore from corrosion. There are no stockings on the front air springs, and this is very in vain. Discovery 4 owners have long been aware of this drawback and install suitable anthers. The corrugations from the rear air springs of the Audi Q7 and VW Touareg are suitable here. There are also specially made boots, RBG 500010. But they will be of use if the lower part of the shock-absorbing strut is not dirty or damaged by corrosion. The rust blisters are wiped off and cut through the rubber balloon of the strut. The air compressor is located on the bottom, next to the frame in front of the rear left wheel. It is covered with a plastic shield into which inexperienced tire fitters can rest the jack. At best, the compressor mount will bend. At worst, he will be crushed by a jack. These cars are equipped with Hitachi LR023964 or AMK later versions compressors. In parallel with the electric motor, such compressors have a container with a desiccant, silica gel, which needs to be changed every couple of years. The pneumatic system has 3 valve blocks: for the front struts, RVH 000095, rear RVH 000055, and near the receiver, RVH 000046. Each original costs $300, $500, although there are many cheaper substitutes. The valve blocks are easy to remove and are completely dismountable. And they need to be disassembled to lubricate the valve seals. For this, either thick silicone or a suitable dry lubricant is used. True, you need to know how to disassemble each valve, where and which rubber band to lubricate, how to stretch the spring, where to clean which hole from dust. The dust comes here not from the atmosphere, but from a container with silica gel. But in general, valve maintenance helps prevent expensive problems. The Discovery 4's steering rack is hydraulic and is no different. By 200,000 kilometers it often asks for a major overhaul. It all starts with fogging from under the right boot. In this case, play in the rack and its guides may already be felt. Sometimes a leak appears in the hydraulic system pressure hose, LR057239. If the steering wheel of this car begins to bite, then most often the culprit is the lower crosspiece of the steering shaft. Instead of the original one, you can install a non-original crosspiece. The Discovery 4 has a double wishbone front suspension. The main consumables here are the silent blocks of the lower arm. These silent blocks, RBX500432 and RBX500531, cost $30 and $50 in the original. It's as if the manufacturer is deliberately not selling them at a high price so that the owners of these cars do not have to suffer with non-original ones. Typically, these silent blocks have to be changed every 75,000 kilometers or even more often. The lower arm ball joint, RBK500280, costs from $40 to $100 and lasts 70 to 100,000 kilometers. The upper arm components are also sold and replaced separately, and they last twice as long as the lower arm components. Both upper silent blocks, RBX500443, cost $30, and the ball one costs up to $80, RBK500170. Front stabilizer links, RBM500140, last up to 80,000 kilometers, and they sell for $20, $60. The steering ends on this big guy are valued at $30, $90, LR010672. The original ones last about 100,000 kilometers. The rear wheels are also suspended on 2 levers, and towing is controlled by a separate rod. The rear suspension is more durable, but if you have to change the tow rods, LR019117, then for quality ones you will have to pay from $40 to $100, or about $170 for the original. The lower LR032644 and upper RHF500100 silent blocks of the rear axle are sold for $60 and $90 and last about 150,000 kilometers. The naked eye can see the Discovery 4 has the aerodynamics of a brick. This mainly affects the windshield. The original is soft and quite fragile. With regular driving on highways, it quickly gets scratched by sand dust, and also easily cracks after stones hit it. It is not uncommon for a windshield to be replaced almost every year. If you choose a Discovery 4 from the secondary market, then don't be surprised by the aftermarket windshield. A chipped radiator grille, headlights, and bumper are a typical picture after several years of use on busy roads. In conditions where many grains of sand and pebbles fly from under the wheels of other cars. If your Discovery 4 is fitted with side steps, be sure to clear all snow off them in winter. The fact is that when the door is closed, the lower plastic molding scoops snow under itself, and at the moment of slamming it simply snaps off. Roughly speaking, the lower door moldings literally fall off if something hard gets under them. The running boards themselves may be left without external decorative molding. The original design has one if it gets caught on an off-road obstacle. Corrosion does not bother the Discovery 4, at least the painted metal does not rust for a long time. But the bottom of any frame SUV is like a corrosion farm. Pockets of rust are often present on the frame, on the underbody, and in the wheel arches. Typically, owners invest in a complete anti-corrosion treatment with the accompanying removal of the body from the frame, cleaning and processing all metal, which is constantly covered with dirt and reagents. Wiring to parking sensors and video cameras suffers from moisture. The rear windshield wiper servo drive stops working due to souring of the shaft on which the leash is attached. Usually everything is fine with the gearbox and lubrication, but the shaft in the immediate vicinity of the driver corrodes. The rear wiper servo can be easily removed, a puller for the arms is required, and disassembled. Cleaning and adding new lubricant will permanently solve the problem. There is a new type of rear wiper drive, ELB5000074. This way the shaft is better protected from moisture. But such a part will cost $230. The Discovery 4's spare wheel is suspended in the rear overhang. It is raised and lowered using a winch. The winch hex goes through the bottom of the trunk and is rotated using a wheel nut wrench. By the 200,000 kilometers mileage, Discovery 4 began to have problems with door locks. The lock actuators are electromechanical, with 2 motors each. The carbon brushes on these motors simply wear out. They stop working. As a result, the lock either does not open or does not lock. To get to the lock, you need to thoroughly disassemble the door, remove the trim, window lifter trapezoid and even the outer handle. Motors or brush holders can be purchased on Chinese marketplaces. If the trunk door lock does not work the first time or false alarms appear, then the problem is in the button. In the original for Discovery 4, the button comes complete with a lock block. However, the button itself is exactly the same as on Freelander 2, LR079909. It costs from $20 to $60. Less commonly, the rear door lock actuator fails. The actuator is installed in the lower leaf. Due to its failure, the lock will not unlock. The top door does not open. If, when trying to unlock the back door, you hear a vigorous buzzing from the actuator, then most likely the end of the cable that the actuator pulls has broken off. The new actuator can be purchased from the Ford catalog 2S6T432A98 off, and it also has many inexpensive analogs. You can also open the housing of a faulty actuator to replace the electric motor in it. In addition, you can put a cable under the trunk trim for emergency opening of the rear door. You can also find a kit for installing a mechanical key for opening the trunk from the inside. This is not an extra tuning if the owner of Discovery 4 spends the night in its huge trunk while traveling. This winch is extremely unsuccessful. It can become unusable even if you do everything according to the instructions. Its cable must be under load, under tension, during rotation. Otherwise, i.e. without load, the cable easily causes its plastic drum, on which it is wound, to jam. In other words, if you have removed the spare tire and are not temporarily going to hang the other wheel in the rear overhang, it is better not to twist the cable, but temporarily secure it to the bottom with plastic ties. If the winch drum begins to jam, and you apply excessive force, then the square on the drum drive shaft easily breaks off. The winch drive plate is very flimsy. In general, probably half of the Discovery 4 has a winch upgraded or repaired in one way or another.